All right, at this time, we're going to bring the March 23rd, 2026 council work meeting to order. We're going to move up number 4 to the first part here. And not being rude or nothing, Jacob, could we have you step out while we're discussing this, just to be fair with everything?
Sure. Happy to do so, Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Mayor and Council, I'm going to try and make it through tonight with my voice. At the last council meeting, we worked on some of the submittals for the city attorney discussion, and I trust you've had an opportunity to review that information. I know it was quite a bit. And essentially what we're kind of up against is a contract that's going to be expiring. We need to get a new contract in place and approved. And this is, we're hoping for direction this evening from the council as to which candidate is of your preference. And then with that direction, we'll work with drafting a new contract and go from there.
Okay. Find it again. There it is, page 2.
Well, I'm going to say personally, I think change is good, and I think we should try the alternate than what we've been using.
I called all the references that are on this page, plus other cities that are included, and I talked to everybody there, and they're very happy with Berglund, Baumgartner, and Glazer. I heard nothing negative at all about them, and they are fast movers. And one thing that I really liked and I heard from a lot of them is they listen to the council, and then they advise on that. I talked to the city administrator in Lexington. They've had them for 27 years. And Elk River Police Department, 17 years. So they've been around a long time. And I had a lot of good, like I said, no negative, nothing, all good stuff. So I'm gonna propose that we go with this company.
The new one?
Yep.
And I like that they're cost less.
That's true.
I mean, change is always good. I agree with that. And I know we've had very good services over the years with Eckberg and that. I think it is time to move forward and go new.
I agree with everything I've heard.
Was one thing I want to have in this new contract, because in the proposal, Mark Berglund says that he's going to be the attorney sitting at the DS here. So I'd suggest that that's in the contract for sure on that. That's all I got.
Brian, any input?
Well, knowing when Eckbert and Lammers came into the city, they've always provided excellent service to the city and for the city. I could go either way. We know the service that we're getting with Eckbert and Lammers. They've always been attentive to all of our needs. All of their attorneys are very good. So I could go either way with this.
So, if I'm hearing right, I'm hearing a consensus to move with Bomberg, or is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And this is going to be a 2-year contract?
I think what they propose is a 3-year contract. They keep their price the same for those 3 years, no increases. That'll be in the contract, obviously. But as with every contract, the city has a 30-day out clause if we don't like, what we have or see or anything of that nature. So I think we're protected from that standpoint if it turns out that this isn't a good fit or whatever the case may be. So
Okay, that's good to hear.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for doing that.
No problem.
So with the consensus moving forward with the new group, we'll bring that to the regular meeting and go forth with that.
At what point would we start to engage them? After May 31st?
I believe it's April 31st is the expiration of the contract, so we would engage them May 1st.
Okay, it says May 31st in our packet here.
Does it say?
Yeah.
We're having a conversation trying to recall the date, but whatever the date is, it'll be the
After that date.
Retroactive.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to number 1, abatement properties.
Mr. Mayor and Council, again, wanted to circle back on this discussion as well. We also gave you a lot of information in the last council meeting concerning 4 properties that are currently code violation properties, and what's the best tool in the toolbox to try and resolve this. Again, from a city standpoint, we don't like being in this position. We would like compliance, and we would like the best tool possible to gain that compliance. Usually it's a letter, might be a fine, but unfortunately these properties have languished, some for up to and over 4 years. So it's time to, I hate to say rip the Band-Aid off, but in some cases that may be the situation that we need to get these resolved. I think we get a lot of phone calls. For example, on the Setterholm property right now, the chatter on the street is that the case was dismissed. That is incorrect. The case was settled as far as prosecution goes, but that does not mean the property is cleaned up. So whatever the penalty was that the courts determined was appropriate, the penalty was paid, the case is closed. Does not mean it's settled. So again, in a prosecution type of arrangement on that, you'd start back at square one again, which will likely end in the same way. So then we kind of step into the civil, civil option, which would be the abatement option. And this is uncharted territory for us. And we would, if the council chooses to go that route, we would engage our new attorney at an appropriate time to start that process, so there isn't that overlap. But they seem to have indicated, at least as far as their presentations, they zeroed in on that because we were having an abatement discussion right before the attorney interviews. But they had indicated that they're very familiar with how to make sure that the city is protected in an abatement procedure, if the council chooses to go that route. So again, it's the staff is consider us Switzerland. We're independent of this. You tell us what you want us to do in terms of what the code is, we enforce the code. You want to change the code, you have the ability to change the code. All we want to do is ensure that whatever code is there is that we're following it and implementing it to the best of our ability, and all parties get treated equally. There's no favoritism. There's been accusations of that in the past, and I wasn't here, so I can't substantiate any of that. But as far as going forward, all parties get treated the same under the code.
Matt, we had a ton of information, at the last meeting. when you go through every one of these files, every time we get to this, it's like we're describing that a common gap, one between like criminal enforcement, you know, with the fines, and actual compliance. You know, that what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that paying the fine is only resolving basically the criminal part of it, where the violation can be just as bad as it was on day one. You know, that's why these fines are punitive, they're not corrective. My question is, going through it, can we actually seek a court order for the resident to clean it up? I mean, we go through fines and fine people, and then we take them to court, and then we have the option of abatement if they don't. Can we ask for a court order? I mean, I would think that might be something we should add to something here with our ordinances if we don't, or if that's just left open. The other thing is, are we assessing those unpaid costs to property taxes? I'd like to know that. I mean, something is awry, and listening to Nick, escalating the fines is one thing, especially if people are using it as basically a cost of doing business at home sometimes, you know, not cleaning up the stuff. But if I was moving into this city, I would expect that this city should be able to protect my investment, so to speak. At the same time, you know, I can sit up here and say, I'm all for as little government as possible on your property and so forth, which I am. But there's a fine line in looking at these properties. I mean, there's some of them that are pretty questionable, to say the least, that are in trouble. One just needs to be cleaned up, just really needs to be cleaned up. So how do we get there when we talk about this stuff? Do we need to escalate our fines? Do we need to ask for court orders? I know the DNR can help us around lakes. I mean, the question is, are we utilizing everything we can to resolve this? And if we are, what do we need to do extra? Because that's not in those files. You know what I mean? It's frustrating because, like you said, 90% of the people, no problem, you know, take care of it. You know, they realize it's not supposed to be that way. But I don't even think you can see that one guy's house from the road. You know, it's that bad. So we definitely have to come up with something.
To Tim's question, Jacob, can we get a court order?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, Mr. Miller. When you pursue the criminal process, you can ask for the court to propose fees or abatement. They're unlikely to grant that in the criminal system. They'll say that's what the civil system is used for. Now, our office has had conversations with staff going on for, well, my predecessors. We talked about this with Matt robustly in December and January. The civil process is what we use to obtain corrections. The criminal process is what we use to punish. And to this point, the city has not been interested in pursuing civil remedies. So when they tell us to prosecute criminally, we prosecute criminally. If they were to tell us prosecute civilly or to pursue civil remedies, then we would. But that option has always been there, it just hasn't been used.
Has anybody up here heard of that for our residents?
No.
We didn't even know that was an option.
Well, staff knows that's an option and has always known that's an option.
So with a civil remedy, we could effectively get a court order for an individual to clean up a property or to remedy whatever code violations there are. And what if they do not follow that court order, what happens then to that property?
If the resident, assuming that the city obtains the relief it's looking for, then the city obtains a warrant to go and clean up the property and assess the costs back to the resident.
So if a court order, A court order can be issued. If they do not follow that court order, then the next step would be abatement.
Through a civil process, yes.
Okay, would we have to go through another round of going before a judge for abatement?
When you,
So
are you saying because you've already gone through on the criminal side, would you have to start over in order
no,
to propose the civil side?
on the civil side, you go in from a judge for a court order. If that fails, do we then have to go in from a judge for a lengthy period to get an abatement?
You would need to have the warrant to enter the property, and so the judge would issue that warrant, and it wouldn't be lengthy. It
So
would
we
be a
wouldn't
matter
have
of
to
one
start the
hearing,
whole
you would-
process over and be another 3 to 6 months. It could just be, okay, they've had, say, X amount of days to comply with the court order, they haven't, so we now choose to go with abatement, and we could have a court order within a week, 2 weeks?
Yeah, it all starts with how we begin the process from an enforcement perspective. So Mr. Schmitz goes out and witnesses the violation, issues a citation, and then we follow the process therefrom to give the requisite number of days and the requisite hearing, and it still has a process associated with it. But once you start down that track, if they don't comply within the amount of time, then the city says, okay, you failed to comply, we're now going to the court. Does that help answer your question? So then the court will issue the relief that the city is asking for at the time.
Yeah, the court would order them to comply.
Yep.
And then if they fail to comply, we can go after abatement. We don't have to go through another court proceeding. It would just be a warrant signed by a judge. And what kind of time process would that take?
In terms of obtaining the warrant from the judge, it'd be as fast as you can get a hearing scheduled with the court.
So
it wouldn't be a new process. It'd be a
Okay.
continuation of the same. You'd schedule to say the
so
property has not
within
been cleaned up.
within a
We're
week,
seeking-
probably?
I don't want to speak for the courts, but conceivably, yeah,
Okay.
within a week.
It wouldn't be a 3 to 6 month.
No, it shouldn't be.
Okay.
It shouldn't be. Courts are never that busy. And then the city's able to assess those costs for abatement back on the property owner for collection with property taxes.
Okay.
As we've discussed, I mean, there's never a hard and fast guarantee, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty procedural in terms of being the same every time. But as Matt has shared, when cities miss a step, sometimes they don't get their costs back, or sometimes the property owner is right. And I think that's part of the system we have in America, right, with private property rights and respecting the government's ability to regulate those properties.
Okay. So,
Does that put the city in a much better legal position in case we didn't have that court order and we did the abatement? They could sue us for anything, correct?
I'll try
If
to
we
answer
have
your
a
question.
court.
If I get it wrong, you just correct me.
If we have a court order, then and they don't follow it, it's much easier for us to get an abatement, or we can just do the abatement?
Well, so the abatement and the court order, it's all part of the same process. You're pursuing a
Right.
civil abatement process for civil nuisance violation. And to do that, you have to work through the courts because we
Right.
don't allow the government to just come onto private property.
Right.
And so the court is how we gain access to, one, the property for abatement, and two, to order that the property owner perform.
So
the
it's
cleanup.
basically two tools right there. We can use one or we can use both of them together, is what I'm hearing?
That
one
might
would
be one way
follow
to
the
think
other.
about it, but it's sort of a follow-on from the first, right? So we're still looking at residents to comply with the
Right.
code, and we're using the civil process to be the hammer in this case, and say, if you won't do it, then we are coming in, and we
Gotcha.
are doing it, and we're making you pay for our costs to come do that.
Okay.
What else?
So I have a question regarding the Dewitts. Exactly what would be abated under the Dewitts? Because it's a plan to go in and take the shed down? Do they know that, and has there been discussion? Because when she contacted me, she said that she is under the impression that she is allowed to have those 14-foot walls. And I understand it's for larger buildings, but I don't think they understand that. And maybe they should be given another chance because, and that is the only thing that I can see that's really wrong with their property right now.
Mr. Mayor and Council, we would do an analysis on what has been fixed or hasn't been fixed and include what hasn't been in whatever the abatement proceeding would be. For sheds of 200 square feet or less, according to code, they can only have 8-foot sidewall heights. Pole barns can have 14, up to 14. And we don't know the size of the shed because we have not been allowed on that property to see it, but it's definitely above 8 foot. And it is, if you look at a satellite view, it's within the 200 range. So that is definitely one of the issues. There is other things that need to be cleaned up too on the side yard. There's this, continued discussion of a bus and as to whether that's ever going to get completed in our lifetime, for an RV, or if it's just going to continue to sit there in a half-completed form. So these are all issues that have been brought up over the years, and so we would do a final analysis on what needs to be abated. And I understand that people may not fully comprehend the code. It's not easy, but when presented with the reality that you're in violation of the code, to prolong it for 4 years is somewhat, somewhat non-cooperative, shall we say. So there's, Councilmember Miller brought up the question about fines. There's 2 fines. There's administrative fines, the 1, 2, or 3 stages of those fines. Those fines are rarely paid, and we cannot apply those to taxes as per a prior legal opinion. However, the court can issue fines, and what we typically find, or have seen at least in the Setterholm deal, is you will get fined and you will serve jail time, or you can clean up your property. And for those that think that paying a fine and 3 hots and a cot is great, you don't get compliance. So that's the unfortunate side of the prosecution, if it gets to that point. Generally speaking, when you get a letter that you need to go to court on something, there's, whether it's 95% or whatever the number is, people usually comply at that point. Some don't. So we need a tool to be able to handle those that.
So you're saying people are not paying fines?
The majority of them are not paid.
Are not paid?
To the best of my knowledge, the only one that has paid them is Foss.
Oh, we're talking about
Administrative
the
fines.
4 fines.
Right, the
that
100, the 250, or whatever
This isn't the
ratchet
majority,
is.
right, of people?
I can check with Nick as to how many outstanding fines there are, but it's almost.
So what happens if they don't pay a fine? We issue a second thing with the second fine?
Yep.
And then a third fine?
Yep. If they continue to refuse at that point, then you turn it over to the attorneys with council blessing, which is the current policy, and you go from there.
Boy, I almost want to know what we're sitting at. I would really like to know what's.
Again, I don't think most people get to fines. I think they, hey,
it up
sorry,
beforehand.
I know it's bad, we're gonna get to it, can you give us a couple weeks? That's generally what we're hearing.
Okay.
For those that say a couple weeks and you call back in a couple weeks and, oh, we need a couple more, you might give them a couple of leeways, but then,
Right.
then you gotta roll in a little heavier. At any rate.
What are amounts? Do you know offhand? First, second, third offense fines, or are they all different in the different categories?
No, I think the first one was 50, second one was 100, and the third one was 150, I think. I'm just trying to draw from memory on what they are.
Right.
We're talking about changing those to a more current, incentive. That's an option to try. I mean, a lot of this is trial and error, right? I mean, it's, again, we would just prefer compliance. We would not like to get to the fines or any of the punitive part, or unfortunately, then you get bad feelings and they're picking on me and calling the council, and you know the whole story, so.
That is the goal. Well, the actual goal is just to correct the problem.
That is the goal.
But just so I'm clear, without an abatement or without a court order, we have no tools at that point, correct?
We can prosecute,
But that's it.
that's it.
I think getting a court order is worth investigating.
As it's laid out here, you wanna try it, that breakout there?
Well, I'm talking in theory right now, that gain a court order before abatement is just been proposed here. I think that's good, because court order would essentially say, this is your last warning, but it's actually issued by a judge.
And it would have a date on it for compliance.
And it would have a date, and then, so we're still giving you opportunity to fix, to resolve your code issues. And if they don't, then they know the next step is abatement.
So there's two components to item number one here.
Yes.
It's abatement, whether you're willing to go down that road, which you're indicating you are. But then there's prosecution for two other properties that we need the council's blessing for if we go that route. Again, we've gotten compliance in the past from Foss. I'm hoping we'll get compliance again. The Gimpl property,
Have we exhausted the letters out to her already?
we're on second or third right now, so. Obviously, before we pursue, Foss is completed already. Can go to prosecution. Gimpl may require a few more process steps, which we would want to follow before that would go to prosecution if you wanted to go that route.
I gotta tell you, I am irritated with the Gimpl thing that's going on. She has one of the nicest horse farms I've ever seen. And I don't know what the problem is, sitting down and getting the permits to have X amount of horses. I don't get it. I don't understand the fight or the fight back. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I know people love her and people hate her in this city, okay? If you watch Facebook. I've seen her facility. Her facility's top notch. Why would you even want to mess around with not having the proper paperwork to do this stuff? It is beyond me. I don't understand it. I really don't.
I don't think her property, according to our code, would support the number of horses she has.
Well, I know she has more now.
Yeah.
But for years, she had, 3 and 4 horses out there, and I know she got some from saving some and so forth. And I think they've expanded a little bit of where the horses can go and so forth. And I've driven by a lot of horse farms, and hers is, it's right up there.
And the animals are well taken care of.
Absolutely, and that's what irritates me, that we can't say, okay, this is your property, this is how many horses you can have, period. I don't understand it. I really don't.
well aware of the ordinance, he
That's-
just
that's-
wants to ignore it.
That's what I don't understand.
You know, it's sad to say.
But I'm hoping we can figure that one out too, because to do what needs to be done to a place that is that nice, I can understand if the horses were not taken care of. This is a whole different ball game. You know, and I don't want to be known as a city that takes away horses from a perfectly good-looking and real nice horse farm. You know, it's just, but there comes a point in time when if you don't have the proper paperwork and you just won't get it, you don't have a choice. You know, and that's what sucks about some of these decisions. That because you want this to be going on, you want this to be a great place for animals, and you know how they're taken care of. But I hope they look at that and think about it and know that they have a great farm. I'd hate to see them not be able to use it because they're stubborn or something like that. I just hope they think about that a little bit.
So moving forward here, we gotta give staff some kind of direction on which route we wanna go on these. Because
Well, I'd say in prosecution side for Foss, you indicated that all the letters and everything else has been exhausted, and it is at the point that could proceed. So I would say let's proceed there. With Gimpl, you're saying that there's still some more steps to be taken. Let's take those. Let's urge her to come in, complete the applications for horse permits to keep as many as she can. 'Cause, I think we all want that. We don't want to trample on really what, personal property freedoms. But we do need compliance at some point. I suppose bring that back to us once everything has been exhausted, all those steps. And with the abatement properties, I would suggest let's look into the court order, then abatement, get some more information on that, see what that looks like, and if we can maybe have something back by the next meeting or 2 meetings, then we could make a decision on how we'd want to proceed on that.
I would suggest that, again, in the middle of switching attorney firms, we should probably wait till we have a new attorney firm on board and we can
Well,
get a clean start.
if we
Yeah.
want to do that.
Okay.
But I'd say that's
but
not.
staff can look into the process of looking at that civil court part of it.
Yeah, I think we should be educated on that before we move forward with trying something new like that.
Yeah, I would think as far as the education goes, we'll want the attorney to educate us on all the legal process there, so.
Everyone good with that? All right,
Okay.
move forward with that one. You wanted to move the fire apparatus up, right?
If we can just discuss the VRBO discussion real quick, I think your gentleman is here for that discussion. Essentially, what we have is our city code does not address VRBOs right now. We have half a dozen or more that are in operation. And usually cities will license that or require some sort of permit to operate VRBOs. The challenge that we're having here is we have a very large house on the lake that is being used more as a venue for weddings, for large parties, for things of that nature. There's inadequate parking. There's a question as to whether the structure can actually hold as many people as are in there, from a fire safety standpoint, safely. There's a question as to whether the septic system can support all those people. And so, as far as the discussion goes this evening, we would just need a head nod from council if you want us to draft up an amendment to the code that would essentially isolate VRBOs that are problematic, you know, you'd need a permit, and the large ones that are venues are not allowed. Unless you have a capacity to handle that, which, again, I think if you're on city sewer and water, it'd be a different scenario. But anything where, you know, you often read of these bars that a fire starts out and people scramble and trample each other and die, and we want to avoid a situation such as that. That might be, you know, exaggeration a little bit, but I really don't know how these things go down with how many people can be there in there. So it's, I think it's just not necessarily a fit within a neighborhood situation where there's excessive noise, excessive parking, potential use of alcohol, and the associated challenges that come with those that leave the property. So,
I know with the VRBO, I think our first process should be just to send them a formal letter from the city, because they do have policies and that on the people that do these venues. So they can take that sort of action, but on the other side, the city side, I've looked into a lot of this, and a lot of cities are going to this short-term rental ordinances, especially up north around the Brainerd Lakes. Chisago County put one on their whole county. There's other counties that have put it on and beat the cities to it, because the city can have a permit process for this too.
Right.
So I think first off, we send a letter to VRBO, you know, saying what the issue is in that. And in the long term, we gotta look at what all these other cities are doing. They're going to these short-term rentals, which spells out everything, all of them.
and speaking with Eric Johnson, this morning, we were talking about this, and he had suggested possibly an IUP, not a CUP that would follow the property, but an IUP that would be able to put some conditions around this, and any violation of those conditions or neighbors complaining or whatever the case is, you can pull that IUP then and restrict that from happening. So
Yeah, 'cause this is Cass Lake's short-term rental
okay.
deal. So they're out there, and actually the League of Minnesota Cities has a model too.
So if we have the blessing from council, we would start working on that if everyone's in agreement.
I think we got it.
I'll chime in quick here, folks. My reading of your rental license for rental properties in Chapter 50 requires registration from anyone renting their units. So you already have a mechanism in place where this property owner should have registered with the city. That's not to say you shouldn't also be regulating VRBOs and STROs, but you already have a process in place.
Yeah, I think the rental ordinance was intended for long-term when it was put into place. Because at that time, there was no ordinances around renting when we put it into place. And VRBOs were not a thing yet. So I think as the times change,
We need to amend it.
we need to,
And define things.
They've
Yeah.
gotta be over occupying that when they do venues in that place.
I think we have a witness that in fact they do.
Well, that's, now we're breaking our own fire, safety codes, all that kinda stuff, so, I mean, if there's nothing there.
Actually, there's a state statute too, 157-15, that involves the health department on these issues too.
Well, it would require them to be inspected with a capacity, like, so if there's 6 bedrooms, that would mean 12 people, and every single room has to have a smoke
detector.
alarm and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Water sprinklers, that kind of thing, for a business.
Okay, sounds like the council's in agreement on that.
Yep.
Okay,
get something.
Yeah.
Get ahead of it,
okay,
because it's gonna get worse.
very good.
All right, fire apparatus discussion.
Mr. Mayor and Council, we've chatted a little bit about the fire apparatus. We've been busy trying to determine the best course of action, and let me just kind of give the historical view on this. We've had a couple of fire chiefs from our current one now, and there was a kind of a ballpark of time frame of what fire engines would last for back then. It is now kind of commonly determined that instead of 30 years, what we planned on, it's more 20 years, especially in a salt-ridden environment like we find ourselves. And so in terms of the CIP and putting dollars away, we, again, depreciate vehicles so that if you have $1 million vehicle and it says a 10-year lifespan, you put $100,000 away so that in 10 years you have $1 million to buy a new vehicle. And there really isn't dollars in there for this kind of change from 30 to 20 years to handle that, so we're kind of up against that issue. But then we do have some dollars in there. I think it's 400,000, if I'm not mistaken. It all gets lumped into an account, but kind of gets separated out. Mike does some of the identification of how those dollars get separated. But at any rate, the fire chief has been working on some options. Wanted to present those this evening. We have about 30 days before the options go away for the vehicles that are out there and can be purchased. So kind of time is somewhat of the essence, but wanted to bring it back before you, see what your preference is on this, and then we can try and work towards accomplishing one way or the other. So hopefully that's a good warm-up.
Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having me back again. Last time that I was here 2 weeks ago, we discussed this, and it was said to bring back options and a timeline. In speaking with Dingus Fire, who sells the HME apparatus that we've been looking at, we have looked at other ones as well, but in talking with them, there's a lease option with them through through Republic First National that I don't know if you have the ability to bring up those numbers.
Can you plug into that?
I can try. So we were sent these options. Nope.
You want to carry it over to that screen? Drag it over.
I apologize.
Just drag it over.
Nope.
Grab the top. There you go. Yep. Ooh, it almost came. There it is.
There we go. So these were numbers that they came up with us to be able to buy both of the apparatus that we had talked about. The amounts that we've been talking about are $900,000 per apparatus. The goal would be to come in under that number between $850 and $900. They asked us when we wanted to start making payments, which are the two options that you see there. First payment due in September of 27 versus first payment due in March of 28. 5, 7, 10, and 15-year plans. When I look at these numbers, if we were going to consider either option, it would be a 10-year plan that allows us to put money aside for a 20-year replacement without running up against a 5-year window to make up that money. As far as the timeline that we have to make a decision, Cummings has said that we have a engine in frame deadline of April 31st, I believe it is, of next year. If it's not in the frame by that time, Cummins is going to recall those engines for their fleets for engine replacements of what's currently out there. What that means is we have until approximately April 10th to tell them our intent, and then they will work with us for a short time after that to extend that so that we can fulfill or sign that contract with them.
So is that April 10th of this year or next year?
April 10th of this year.
Okay.
Because it's a 13-month build,
Yep.
the engine has to be in the chassis or in the frame rails in order to meet the deadline proposed by Cummins.
Yep.
So again, these are some of the options that we came up with. as far as looking at being able to take advantage of this opportunity to get ahead of the 27 emissions and hit the reset button on the main part of our fleet.
So essentially, they're under payments for 10 years. You're looking at $237,582.63. If we have somewhere in that $400,000 range of money already set aside, we'd have 2 years of being able to pay for that, while we're able to marginally try and increase that CIP without big spikes, to pay for this every year. $100,000 increase is easier than a $200,000 increase on the budget for 1 year spike. So it's you should consider that there is interest on this. You will be paying interest on it. If you take out a bond to purchase this, you'll be paying interest. Anything short of having cash on hand, you won't pay interest. But the cash that is primarily in there has been religiously set aside by our Public Works Department, who manage all the way down to a brush cutter of when it needs to be replaced and what dollars will be needed in there. That is the new model that we're implementing for the fire department as well. These are the most expensive assets we have in terms of equipment, and they need to be managed appropriately so that we have those dollars in hand when these two new pieces of equipment 20 years from now need to be replaced. We may not be here, but we certainly don't want to hamstring those that are. So we got to set those plans in place to account for that. So again, we can raid the account of the money that's in there, the 1.8 million that we have in there, but then again, that puts Public Works in jeopardy, right? We've got equipment kind of scheduled out for them that needs replacement, and so this would be a lease to own type of scenario, paying an interest rate, and would solve the immediate need that we have for equipment, that some of which is aging, some of which could be utilized still as a backup unit, positioning the department a little better than it currently is. So.
One thing I would like to clarify is this is termed a lease. This is not like your automobile lease where this would go back to the manufacturer after 10 years. There's a $1 buyout at the end of the lease contract, and that asset becomes ours.
Lease to own.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that for anybody that might have been thinking the way I was when I first heard the word lease.
The 10-year looks like it has the least amount of pressure on taxpayers, for dollar-wise. Is that what I'm seeing, that? The impact that it's gonna make on our residents for, taxes?
Well, technically the 15-year would be the lowest payment that we could make per year.
Right.
Again, that has to be considered though on the time frame that it gives us to build up that asset, that
Right.
account to replace these vehicles in the 20-year plan.
Right.
Can you give a little description on the frames on the current trucks, what they're made of, and the frames on the new trucks and what they're made of?
So the current apparatus that we have, I can speak to engine 11 specifically. I may need to rely on the mayor here for a little bit of help on the frames. But engine 11 has a two-piece steel frame. They are sandwiched together C-channels on either side that make up the frame rails. One of the things that they are prone to is rusting in between the two frame rails, which leads to rust jacking. That rust jacking can eventually break the frame. This is a common problem. This is a known issue. However, it is an issue with these trucks nonetheless. When we had engine 11 repaired this last time for a water pump, while the mechanic was waiting For the part to arrive, he said, hey, I noticed that this engine has the beginnings of rust jacking on the frame. It was not severe. He didn't say that it was detrimental at this point, but we know that now it is started, which with the age could be expected. Again, it's a common issue with these frames, these two-piece frames. The new frames are galvanized steel, and then they typically coat them as well, which is supposed to minimize that issue. Long term, I would say it's hard to say it's impossible for anything like this to happen, but that's another reason for that 20-year turnaround for these pieces of apparatus. Again, engine 11 is a 2003, engine 21 is a 2013, and again, I would have to actually ask the mayor if he knows if engine 21 is a galvanized frame or if it was traditional.
No, it's not galvanized.
Okay, so then it's a traditional frame like engine 11 would be.
Well, I think getting the proper tools for the fire department to fit their needs to protect our residents are a priority. The fact that you found 2 of them and there's such a good deal on them, you know, it is a very good deal if you were to piece them out one by one. The fact right now is finding the right comfort zone for the city in spending it so we can do it and not have to pay a lot more money down the road because it's going to be a lot more. So I think we should look at the softest way to impact this deal. I mean, look at it from all the numbers like you're doing and go with that one. That's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I think the chief's due diligence that he's put forward here and trying to find a better process that'll impact the residents the least is a credit to himself. I mean, that's way above. I would have never even looked at something like that because I don't think we had it back in the days when we bought trucks. But no, that's very interesting.
Engine 11 still has a fair amount of value, and I'm waiting for a value on engine 21 should we decide to sell that as well. But it sounds like the value on that is, I'm not going to give the numbers they gave me, but from what I'm able to find in the records, it's close to what we paid for it in 2013 that they believe they can sell it for, and that's because of the increase in the current apparatus prices. Again, I can't confirm that 100%. We do not have a buyer for it. That's not what I'm saying, but that's what they're estimating.
There's potential for recovery.
Correct.
I think the chief's done a good job of breaking this down in the research, and I agree with what Mr. Miller says too. It's like we got to look out for our residents and our firefighters as well. And some of the stuff that we have is older, and the new stuff is where the new is. And price-wise, it blows me away, but that's just the way it is. But I understand it's going to get higher. So I think he's done a great job at doing that, and I think we should maybe move forward.
Mr. Mayor, we can bring forward the financials on this and do a deeper dive on how we would pay for that. Again, we wouldn't have to make a payment till 2027.
2027 or 2028, respectively, on these options.
Yeah.
So
We'd have a little bit of time to put some money away.
But doesn't he have to have a deal verbal before the 10th of next month?
Yeah.
We wouldn't meet before then.
No,
I was
we-
told that if I get them an intent, that we intend to go forward, it doesn't have to be a written agreement right now, is to my understanding, that they would work with us for a short time after that, which would definitely get us to the 14th, or to the 13th rather, of April, which is the next scheduled meeting. However, that's what I found out today, so just relaying that message.
So does it require a down payment then, or is it just an intent letter?
This is zero down.
Okay.
If we were to go through with the financing option here, it's zero down with this bank. I can follow up with HME and figure out what their intent requires, but it sounded like it was just me telling them we intend to move forward with this, and then they would work with us on the date. It wasn't gonna be something that could be extended, by a couple of months or something. It was gonna be, a couple of weeks. Their hands are also tied. They're bound by the manufacturer who's going to put out their new engine that's going to be in these trucks. And the estimated increase is at least $100,000 from what we're currently looking at.
Is there any room on the interest rate?
I don't know. I can call the bank and ask.
Right, well, negotiate.
Doesn't hurt to ask.
I can do that.
Okay,
Got a deal for you.
Yeah.
That we'd be using to soft sell it would be the cash that we have on hand. So we'd probably want to hold that and make those payments with it. So we'll come up with a financial strategy.
Okay.
So
The grants for vehicles are very difficult to get. They are out there, but they're very difficult to get. There's no way we would meet any of these timeframes. We'd be looking at spending more, and the chances of getting them are very low. But they are out there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if we applied, we wouldn't, I realize we wouldn't have time to do it now, but maybe we get it in a year or two from now, and we could put a big chunk of money down on it. That was my train of thought, anyway.
We can see if that's something we can do. I'm not positive that that's possible after a purchase has been agreed to.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Thanks, Chief.
all right. This time we'll close the work session.